Welcome back to the barn remodel project. Now, this is also just a very still photo type video because this was all done prior to uh, the beginning of 2021. We really haven't touched the barn much prior to this. So all I have is still footage, but it's one of those, I want to have this stuff here so that we can go back and we can say, wow, look how far we've come. Again, if you want to see where we actually started, I'll try and link that video down below. It's a little lengthy because I got a little chatty, but hey, you can see all the original photos from when we bought the barn or our house in general back in November of 2018. The day that we bought our house, we started renovating it. And we had stuff thrown all over the front yard, the backyard, the side yards. The floors were completely covered in crap. And of course, as you can see, there was a pile here in front of the barn. This pile actually sat in front of the barn until last year when the coronavirus pandemic hit and we were all stuck at our houses during quarantine and had nothing better to do. And that's when I decided I was going to get rid of that pile because I was sick and tired of seeing that pile. Now, I had also spent a lot of that early part of that lockdown landscaping the front of our yard, and my goal was to also landscape around the barn, even though the barn was in terrible shape and at that point in time nothing had really even been done to it. But I knew, for one, I was sick and tired of that pile that sat right there in front of that blue door. Now, that blue door is the one that actually would lead you into what is now my husband's office. It was also an office for one of the previous owners, as well as I think they were going to turn that into either a living room or a bedroom when the house was the barn was originally thought to be made into an apartment. So I grew up on a farm, and in fall of 2019, we finally had slowed down from farm duties to the point that we could start potentially working on creating an office for my husband. Like I mentioned before, up until April of 2020, I believe it was, my husband had actually set up camp for his office in the living room of our house. So the people who also were going to help us at the time had a lot of farming responsibilities too. And once the winter or the fall kind of hit, all of that kind of dies down just a little bit, which frees up some time and some space, and there again, some energy for us to be able to go in and do projects such as this. So one of the first things that they did was they tore out the wall that was between what is present day office and the hallway. And then they framed it up because they actually made that room just a little bit on the bigger side. The other goal was there was a doorway that took you from that particular room into the kitchen area, and we were closing off that doorway, and we made a doorway that actually takes you more into what is the main hallway of the barn. Some of the other things that we had to consider was there was a 2x12 beam that ran from the front end to the back end of the barn along the hallway. That needed to be replaced because it was actually split out and broke in a couple of places. So we replaced it with a 2x6 that was put together with some plywood and then another 2x6 or something, but they're strong enough beams that they can actually be a braced support beam. Then it helps that you have the beams that are load-bearing beams that actually go from floor to ceiling. Then we had to go through and we had to think about wiring and how we were going to wire up the barn and anything that just needed to be fixed and that type of thing. So we spent a little bit of time just kind of going back to the bone basics, because at this point in time, we were really focusing on trying to get my husband back out of the house and into the barn. It's just, that didn't happen. He wound up moving from the house into the camper, but another story for another day. And a funny side note, although I'm not sure how funny it really is back when we were doing the remodeling on our house, after we kind of got to a point where my father-in-law and I couldn't do a whole lot, we decided to go out to the barn and do a little bit of demo out there because we had a big roll-off where we could get rid of the demo debris. Well, the first room we started in was what was going to be my husband's office, and my father-in-law and I went in and we started tearing down the ceiling. The ceiling was made out of, they're like 12 by 12 styrofoam square things that hook together, and I don't really know what they are. So we started tearing those down, and after about the third or fourth one that I finally got torn off the ceiling, I got hit in the head by a dead mouse. I freaked out, took off running, finally calmed down, came back, because I don't do mice. I also don't do snakes, for those of you that care. Then we tore down a few more sheets, and I got hit in the head by a live mouse. It was all I could do not to take off out of the room, screaming and never come back. We did finally get it all torn down, and we got it all put off in the dumpster, but I looked at my husband and I said, "Boy, you owe me big time." Then everybody got busy, and the barn was never touched again. So, jump forward to spring 2020, and the coronavirus pandemic hits, and I got stuck in the house. Well, technically, I didn't get stuck in the house because I refused to stay in the house. So I actually started doing all kinds of projects outside. This is how I started a garden, and how I landscaped our house and started landscaping the barn and everything else, because there was no way I was staying in that house. Now summer 2020 has hit, and my husband is working in the camper because we're having to keep my daughter in the house all the time, or she and I spend a lot of time outdoors, but still, when we were in the house on the days it was cold or rainy there in the early spring, I couldn't just make her stay in her room all day while my husband had to work. So it worked out that he was able to move to our camper. So the other part of all of this is we decided that we needed to start working on the office again to get him back out of the camper. So we had about 2 days in there where we did a little bit of work, but instead of working on the office, we started tearing down all of the walls between the main hallway of the barn and the other side of the barn, or what is actually the east side of the barn. Why we did that, I don't really know. Maybe somebody was having a bad day, and I can sure tell you, tearing down a wall makes a bad day feel just a little bit better. I learned that with our house. But we only worked on the barn maybe a couple more days, and then the barn wasn't touched again or really even thought of until my mother-in-law started talking to my husband about potentially putting a double wide or a single wide on a piece of property that my parents had a rental house on. And then it all came unfolded where we were going to just remodel the barn to put my mother-in-law there. And that brings us up to date into 2021. Please don't give up on me just yet. I promise we are getting to the good part. This is more of I wanted to see where we had come from and where we have been when we start getting into the good stuff. I am getting to the point where I have videos of us doing a lot more demolition and or remodeling and or construction and whatever else it's comprised of. So please hit that like and subscribe button and stay tuned. It does get better, I promise.